Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in to this portion of our three-part discussion series in collaboration with the Sphinx organization as a continuation of Learning to Listen, the panel discussion Randall, Stephen, and myself put on back in June, discussing the Black experience within classical music and beyond. Today, we will be discussing the intersectionality between identity, race, and sexuality, specifically within the LGBTQIA+ community. It is my hope that the panelists sharing their experiences today, in addition to learning about some of the work they're doing as leaders in the field in creating an inclusive and safe space for this community, both educate and inspire you to do the same in your own endeavors. I hope they challenge some of your notions and you learn something new. Thank you so much. The first thing to discover and to talk about is, why is this discussion needed in the first place? Why are we bringing to Sphinx a discussion, an hour-long discussion only on the LGBTQIA+ community and people of color, perhaps? What does it mean to be an artist of this day and age of color? What does it mean to be an artist that identifies on the queer spectrum? What are those intersections? And why is it important that we discuss those and learn about those? And what we can do to make sure that we're doing the things that need to be done in order to create a real positive experience for all involved. So just to get the ball rolling, I'd love to talk to Clifton, Joey, and I'd love to get your opinion on this.
Yeah, I really think being a Black queer trans person is really fun because I'm usually in a group of best. So it makes me really happy to always be in that space. But the thing is, the reason it's important to be intersectional is that I'm not queer or Black, I'm Black and queer, and there comes so much history with that. And Black history is queer history, and queer history is Black history because of Marsha and also Sylvia Rivera. You know, Stonewall would not exist without those two people, but yet it's infiltrated with white supremacy today. With all of that, you know, it's also really important to talk about the racism that's in the queer community that bleeds into the concert halls. Because there's been many times at Peabody or a Spoleto or anywhere I go to play and someone's like, oh, I can tongue click louder than you, or I have an inner Black woman. I'm like, no, you have a mammy inside of you. You have mammatized or have a caricature of a Black woman inside of you. You know, there is so much racism. And as Erica Hart says, your sexuality will never absolve you of your racism. That means white cis people, white gay people, white trans people, you know, whiteness is still there. The white supremacy is still there. And the biggest thing to me of why these conversations need to happen is because when I walk into a hall, primarily now I do like solo contemporary works or contemporary ensemble. But even there, if I walk into a space and I feel the white supremacy or just the oppression, I can't play as well. I want to show up in Kiki. You know, like I just want to be out here, and you can't do that if you're choking on the oppression. So we need to talk about this more to get rid of what we call professionalism, but is actually just white supremacy. You know, we're supposed to be conforming to this, which none of us are. So we need to keep talking about this so we can all show up and be the bad bitches that we are.
Jamie, what about you?
I think it's obvious that not even the music community, I think we're doing our best within the music community to educate, but this is like a worldwide problem. Everything happening right now is a worldwide problem. And I think, especially for most of us, I assume, is like, what can we control? Okay, well, we can make something in this space. So I think like this is us all trying to make this space where we can all be like queer and happy. I lost my train of thought, but like queer and happy together. You know what I mean? And those spaces don't exist, especially in the concert scene. From what I've seen, like I was on a tour with a very like straight edge kind of ensemble that was in percussion, and the director of the organization, he was gay, and he told me this is the most fun he's ever had on a tour. And like, this is his thing. I was on a tour with him and he got to be the gayest he could feel because I was there. And like, at the core of that, that's unacceptable. That he's hiding himself within his own organization to make sure he's still going to play the game he needs to play to get the hits he needs to hit. You know what I mean? And I'm seeing more and more Now what I was like, oh, this game's easy to play. You do this, you get this. You have 5 options open. The game is just built, like you're saying, in white supremacy. It's like, what steps do you need to take to please the people, to get all the things done, so then you can get the success that everyone else is getting. So it's like very exposing what's happening in the world and what's happening in the music world, and just in general how much hate is happening for no reason. There's just so much hate in Facebook groups, on Instagram, and it's just confusing why it's necessary.
Right, exactly. The confusion, I can totally understand that. Tona, what about you?
I think that, can you guys hear me? I think that it's important to have this conversation simply because some of us are trailblazing through these systems, as everyone has been speaking about before. We're trying our best to be the greatest musicians that we could ever be. And so all of this stuff just gets in the way, you know? I remember just performing with the Gateways Music Festival and doing all these things and realizing that in order to have some of these experiences that were so amazing, we had to do them in purely Black Latino spaces, in order to have an exchange in musicianship. And so it should not be that way. And then to compound it by being a transgender person, that was something that most people, even in those spaces, didn't understand. And so I had to deal with that while trying to understand myself, as a teenager, and having to deal with people who just didn't understand who I was, um, didn't understand why I was there. That's something totally different. And that was even in Black spaces. As a transgender person, what you find, the intersectionality that we're talking about, you'll find that you get so many different levels of discrimination on every level. But yet at the same time, I'm good enough not only to be there, not only to not just be in an ensemble, but to be in the front, performing solos with all these people, not getting calls by other classical musicians that look like me or who are of the same race, and then to have to deal with the stuff that we have with the discrimination for being African American. So you just have so many different things that happen to you when you are trying to excel as an out Black or minority classical musician. So this conversation is important. It needs to happen. And I'm glad to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. Stephen, Hall, I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have already really touched on this, but what for me, why this is so important, has a lot to do with being able to, enable everyone to have an affirming environment where they can embrace their full selves, and that enables them to reach their full potential, right? Ever since, Jamie and I started Spectrum Ensemble, our whole thing is LGBTQ representation. And so we talk a lot about how meaningful it was to us to see, when we first finally found out about some gay performers, or about, for me, some Black performers or something, it means a lot. And everyone has had those experiences where you don't see that representation and then you see that, and it means so much to you. Since we started Spectrum Ensemble and we've been talking more openly about it, like, it's people's reactions to that, it's become so clear, like how pervasive it is, how, widespread that feeling is of everyone. It's like, I don't know, just seeing that representation is so important, and it like really makes a difference. We hear a lot from people about how they feel, especially in something like classical music, where we're very much, especially I think in the US, we value perfection and like a high level of excellence in terms of like technical ability. And we've heard from so many people, like, you don't want to be fully open, as your fabulous self, or you sort of have to assimilate into like the straight white heteronormative white supremacist culture of classical music in order to feel like you're not being judged by some other thing. You want to be judged by your ability, right? And just assimilating yourself like that and having to deny part of yourself, you can't reach your full potential. Or at least if you can, it's a lot harder. No one should have to go through that just to be part of, this community, right? So yeah, those are some of my thoughts. I think, yeah, representation, like, it might seem like a really small thing, but it's really meaningful,
Right, exactly. I love what you said, and also going off what Tona said a little bit, all these things just compound off one of another, and then after a certain point, it begins to say, am I actually doing at all what I intended to do in the first place? What's holding me back, really? That's incredible. Beth, I'd love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm going to state it any more eloquently than Stephen just did. But I think that authentic connections are possible on stage and off, more authentic connections when people are able to bring their whole selves to their work, right? Like when we're not showing up in various drag personas, sort of like straight drag, when we're not doing that conforming that Joey was talking about. I think also it's crucial that these conversations are happening publicly. Like we talk about these issues amongst ourselves a lot, but I'm thinking of this conversation that Janae Bridges hosted for LA Opera over the summer, and like how vulnerable a bunch of Black opera singers were in sharing their stories, and what an impact that had on some organizational policies across the country. I think allowing people who aren't in our community to hear us discuss these ideas amongst each other is really crucial in helping them understand in a way that they might not if they were just reading about it or watching a fictional representation.
Right, that's incredibly poignant, I think, and I know that for me, I think that as a cis male, it's something that's very easy for me to not think about, and I feel like I need a conversation like this to continue to be more reflective myself and to try to be more respectful. So I appreciate all of what you've said so far. I'm imagining some of what you've already said will go into this next question, but I'm curious if you have maybe specific experiences that you've had, or specific instances that really led you to dedicate your careers to being activists and to being advocates for the LGBTQ plus community, and how has your career changed since you made that choice? And we could start with Jaime.
Yeah, so this is like following up a little bit of the last question and a bit about this first question in terms of how we can see change. One thing I'm realizing as I'm hearing everyone talk, and one thing that is pretty standard in the classical music world, is we all have to go to a university to prove our success. So that means all of us are usually having a professor who is with us for 4 years throughout the thing. The entire time we're there. Then you go to a different school, blah, blah, blah. So where this starts is professors in universities. They have to make the change because they are training these kids for the real world of what classical music is. And quite frankly, most of what I learned in school I don't use, or I wasn't taught. You know what I mean? So what are we doing there? So I think professors, and like some specific examples of what professors need to stop doing. One would be stop telling, in the percussion world, female students need to wear high heels to play marimba. That's weird. Don't say that. And then also don't say that to all the girls except the gay girls. That's also weird. Okay? Specific example. Another specific example would just be any adversity to letting a girl wear a dress during their recital and being like, no, you have to wear pants, and just not letting any female want to express their outfits in the way they want to express. Yeah, I would say that universities is a really good place to start, and professors need to probably educate themselves the most, because they are responsible for their entire studio. And if you're not creating good people in your studio, you shouldn't be an educator. And then I start getting really mad about what it means to be an educator and why you're doing it anyway. And like, a lot of people aren't doing education for educator reasons, which is a whole nother issue within the structure of how school is set up. But I would say, since this has happened, since I've started advocating, a lot more people have reached out to me for help, which is cool. A lot of queer friends who didn't know what, like, I had a friend who was scared of telling our old professor that she was trans, and like, what do you think that's gonna do, type of thing. And it's just like, you shouldn't have to worry about that. That's like not something a professor should have an opinion about. You should let your student just be the student, and like, let them be who they want to be, essentially. Yeah, so since that, I have seen changes. I have seen people, and this is all because of the summer and the Black Lives Matter movement. All of this goes hand in hand with it, as people are opening their eyes to other minorities and what's happening. And I think that in the long term, these are little things we can do, just starting at the university level, and then like at the music education level for K through 6, like how you can teach diversity. You can tell, we have so many composers, and that's what I found out when we started Spectrum Ensemble. So many living composers, or past composers, were gay, and we're never taught about that in music history. Why would the music be like that if those people were not battling with some side? You know, if you're really going to get down to it, if we're creating music, it's a part of us. So being queer is a part of us. So how dare you not say their sexuality wasn't important to the art they were making?
Yeah, and I think it's incredibly powerful too that you were saying that since you just identified yourself as an advocate, people were able to take comfort, you know, in being able to talk to you about these issues, because I think in all systems of oppression, people can just feel so lonely, you know, and so that's really powerful, I think. Can I pass it to you, Tona?
Sure. Well, I'm going to be bluntly honest. I never saw myself as an advocate or an activist in the beginning, and it came from having a wonderful mentor who recently passed away. Her name was Monica Roberts, and she called me, and the GLAD organization wanted me to share my story on a regional level, because at the time the big push was for gay marriage and different things. And she called me and she said, you know, I've read one of your articles, and you said in the article how you're just a musician and, you know, this, that. And she was like, just you being who you are is political. And so she explained those things to me. And the fact that I was so out and proud about it, it was a political statement. And so being that I was just someone who just wanted to work and just, I've been trained ever since I was very young to be a performer. I never wanted to be in an orchestra. I never wanted to be in an opera company. What I wanted to do was travel around the world in a chamber ensemble. And so I started my own chamber ensemble. And, you know, I had always been doing solo work and different things. And so through that, I had to educate myself on what the perceptions were of people who looked like me, who were like me, and what that meant to so many people, and why people were always crying at my performances and just coming up to me and hugging me and shaking and just going through different things, because the only thing I wanted to do was just be happy and be myself. And what I refused to do was to allow society to say that because I was a transgender person, that all of those years of training, master classes, Isaac Stern, and all these people, and pre-Juilliard program, all these different things didn't matter. But I remember something that really was transformative when I did that article, and they pushed it all around Virginia, of course, and it was all over the place, and I started doing work with GLAAD. I remember getting phone calls from other singers who I sung with, who were opera singers and different things, who just said, "Oh my God, why did you say anything? You have a magnificent voice. You're doing well. What was the point? And you may have just ruined your career." I remember after that article, then I lost my church job. And I remember that the guy who was the head of the church, he was a gay man, okay? And he sat back and watched me lose that church job. And the minister came to my house and he said the same thing. "Ma'am, we didn't know you were trans. You know, why did you feel the need to have to say anything?" Well, first of all, I'm not ashamed of who I am. And if I could do the job before you knew I was trans, why does it matter right now, sir? And I said, "So you had a spiritual calling, and that calling told you to go and be a minister, right? I have a calling too, and that is that I'm a musician, and none of that should matter." And then another situation happened where Arminta Hummings, who was one of my mentors as well, I've always been very blessed to have mentors who were there for me because they knew I was going to go through something. Because you got to remember, when you are young and you're training to be a musician, that's it. You know, I'm walking down the hallways, hearing things, crying, wishing that I could play like Aunt Sophie Mutter and all these different people. And, you know, you don't know that the world has an issue with you. You're just trying to be yourself. You're just trying to live. You're doing auditions. And then you got to think too, I went to an art high school where I was winning the concerto competitions and doing things. So you're in a bubble and you really don't know that there's a problem, that people are going to bring their issues with you to you. You're just there to audition, and that's the way it should be. But the reality is that it's not. And so what the reason why this conversation is so transformative, the reason why it's so important is because I know too many people who got those calls and then they stopped singing, they stopped playing, they got depressed, or they just went to IT or something like that. And so part of the change is what we're doing now. We are letting people know we're here, we're queer, we're transgender, we're whatever it is. And that has nothing to do with our ability as artists. In fact, it does enhance our artistry, as someone said just now. You know, it enhances our artistry. We are very blessed to be who we are in many, many ways. And we bring all those experiences to our music. So I just want to thank you all again so much for having this conversation, sharing it with these orchestras. I didn't never want to be an orchestra musician, but there are those who do. There are certain systems that I just knew were not going to be there for me. That's just period, point blank. I already knew when I transitioned and I started to perform around the world and do different things that there was a certain avenue. And those mentors, which we need more of, pulled me to the side like Shirley Verrett and said, "Darling, your voice needs to be heard, but you're going to have to find your own niche." And that's what I worked hard to do, was to not allow people to say that because I am ... I cannot do ... So that's part of the change. I'm sorry, I went a little long. I'm sorry.
Absolutely fine. Thank you so much for that insight. Sort of piggybacking off what Stephen said, as a cis male, I feel like this is such an important conversation for me to be able to gain a little bit more insight and understanding into what people who are not necessarily walking the same walk of life that I do go through. And I wish we could have heard from more people for that last question, but I think the next one sort of goes hand in hand, and it's a bit of a two-parter. The question is, what are some unique challenges that LGBTQ plus people face in the music industry? I mean, we've heard how intersectional a lot of these issues are with Black Lives Matter and so many other social issues. And the second part to that is, are there any challenges of these unique challenges that you feel are still going more unnoticed than they should be? For example, pronouns are something that more people are starting to realize that is an important thing. But are there some other issues that people really don't know about? And if I could we start with Clifton, Joey, on this one?
Yeah, I think just the issue of a lot of musicians think that playing benefit concerts is the extent of volunteering that we can do, when there's a lot of things that we can do outside of that. And for me, it just, pulling from the last question, going into this one, growing up in Houston, you know, Beyonce, but it just like taught me so much about how easy it is to be taught that you need to package yourself in. Like when I came out, my family asked me to not say anything, like a lot of people, but then I moved to Baltimore and I met a lot of unhoused people who were queer that lost a lot of their friends in the AIDS epidemic. And these are all Black people. And then moving to New York, and there's still so much homelessness with Black and Latinx, gay, lesbian, and trans people. And it's horrific that this is still going on, but a lot of orchestras think that, oh, well, we're gonna play this little concert about Pulse and we're gonna keep it trucking, you know, and it's really fucked up, you know, it's really sad. And some unknown issues. It's just that we have to conform, we have to code switch all the time. And it's so exhausting. But also clothes. I would say, okay, I was hired to do colored music, and this still pisses me off to this day. And I was not allowed to go and perform because I did not want to wear a tux. It was a medical issue, but also because of my gender. And Lee Pringle was like, "Look, bitch, like it's not gonna work out." So I did not get to go and make money, which is discrimination from our own community. Make it make sense. So it's just like that. But to me, what we really got to talk about is, if we're going to get into the queer, we need to talk about the racism in our own community, because a lot of times, I'm sorry, like I can't deal with it. My circle has become Black, Afro Latinx, Brown Latinx people in contemporary scene, the free jazz scene. We have to bond together, because we're already kind of excluded from the classical world, even though we all classical training. But then we suddenly forgot how to play scales and to play multiphonics. But it just really is heartbreaking to see. Our whole community went through the AIDS epidemic. Our whole community was not allowed to love each other in public. Our whole community, and still parts of this world, will still be murdered. But you're still going to take that shit in the States, and just because you have white skin, you're still going to uphold this racism in a community that's been up and over for so long. And the thing is, these orchestras doing Black Lives Matter now, this happened 400 years ago when they stole us and brought us over here. So why now? And does it stop now that we're in 2021? You know, we have to wait and see. But pronouns are important. Dress code is important. Also, dress code, wear whatever you want. It's like Sister Act 2. Just go play. You know, orchestras don't have enough money now anyway. Stop making all these rules. So it's a mess. But I think mostly musicians, all musicians. I don't even like to say all with other people, because white people are made that all lives matter traumatic. But all musicians really need to understand that we are capable of giving our time in other ways. You know, go to the streets in Central Park, make sure people have food, make sure people, the thing is, make sure people have proper syringes, because people still will have addictions. Make sure people have condoms, you know, make sure people have the essentials that fit their life, that are essential to them. Find ways to have a benefit concert, to get an apartment for people, you know, as long as we can, because we live in a capitalist society that is very capable of giving free housing, i.e. coronavirus hotels, and they choose not to. So we need to do more. We need to fight for more and break out of what we can do in classical music, because when we do more, it will come back to what we do now. And that is a big thing. We need to think bigger, because the problem is just so much more. You know, I hate going to a rehearsal and feeling like I have to hide part of myself, but I also hate coming out of my house dressed like a femme and thinking I could be murdered for multiple reasons. So there's just so many issues that I feel just really stem from just a lot of white gay people not being checked. And because they can blend in, you know. But like you said, Jamie, there are a lot of composers out there that were gay that are dead. And the thing is also they could blend in. But there's also a huge lack of Black gay composers that we don't even know of, you know, like it's just not there. But we can't blend in because we are here, you know. If you go listen to Negro Swan and listen to like Janet Mock, and she talks so beautifully about this, but everyone wants to have this queer experience of just like the fun, the kikis, what we bring to the hall, go to drag brunch and all this, but no one wants to give credit to ballroom. No one wants to give credit to the kiki scene where all of this stems from. But a lot of people just want to benefit from our hard work as queer people of making the trends, making the fashion. Black trans women are the reason we have fashion. So why we have this lingo, everything, you know? So all of these issues really just come together. And once we tackle all X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, we will start to see change everywhere and not just in the field of music.
Thank you. Wow, that really hit home, and it piggybacked off of, I think, what Jamie said in the beginning of how this is not, it's so far beyond classical music. It's not an issue that we can solve by going into halls and trying to fix it, but it's so far beyond that and it reaches so much farther. I think we've got a few more minutes for this question. Could I move to Stephen Hall?
Yeah, I mean, Joey, you just said so much. I don't even know how I'm going to follow that up, but I guess going back specifically to the music world, the classical music world, you know, of course, you know, there's so many problems in our society in general, and even just to be talking about music is like a privilege, right? Even just to be musicians is a privilege when there's so many bigger issues. But even, you know, we are here in this classical music field, and like people can be doing better. It can be doing things in their organizations to do better for queer people, to do better for people of color. And I think that more people in leadership positions in orchestras or whatever, or music organizations, they need to they need to recognize their privileges, you know, based on whatever identities they have. You know, like Clifton was saying, white gay men, you know, they have a certain amount of privilege, and they might not be the same level as straight white men, you know, but there's still things, your privileges determine your blind spots, right? And right now people have all the blind spots. And so, you know, we could spend this whole conversation talking about things like dress code, which is a really big thing. Like most organizations don't have a non-binary option for dress code, right? But that's just one of like so many things. And all of the things are going to be different depending on what kind of organization you have. Like, for example, I was on a talk recently about LGBTQ creating affirming spaces for queer people in choirs. And I don't sing, I'm a percussionist, but and so I learned that there's this whole thing that's specific to choirs about what do you do when you have like a soprano who's comes out as trans and then starts to transition. Like, do you have that system built into your choir, or is that something you're gonna like handle after that happens, right? So I think people need to, one, recognize their privileges, recognize their blind spots, and then maybe, you know, hire someone to come in and help you to develop better systems within your organization that that create more affirming spaces for people. Because it's all gonna be different depending on the group. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I love what you're getting at, and it's really, you know, as you said, each group and organization is different, but just having those guidelines in play. What if, you know, thinking about finding what their blind spots are and then acting on them, as opposed to just kind of letting them be their blind spots and, oh, when it happens, we'll take care of it, that's where a lot of the issue is in the first place, I think. I would like to talk a little bit about some of the fabulous work you all do. And so, Beth, you are the founder of Verismo Communications, as well as Turn the Spotlight. And I'd love for you to talk about your work, how it came about, and because I think what you're doing is really fantastic in terms of bringing the people, these voices, to the spotlight, to use your word.
Thank you. First of all, 100 points for your pronunciation of Verismo. That was flawless. Verismo Communications, for those of you who don't know, is a classical music PR firm. My kind of special niche of the industry is amplifying the authentic voices of women, queer folks, and people of color in classical music. And there's a lot of Venn diagram overlap between those various intersectionalities. Obviously I have some personal points of intersection there. And I find that by being vocal about who I am and what matters to me, I tend to attract artists and organizations that share those values. So I end up with sort of self-selecting group of clients, and that perpetuates itself. And then Turn the Spotlight is a nonprofit mentorship organization. So we exist to identify and nurture leaders among equity-seeking groups in the arts. So that means a lot of women and people of color, trans people, gender nonconforming folks, and we pair people that we think have exceptional potential with people who are at the top of the field, and we make sure that they're getting one-on-one mentorship. It's entirely volunteer run and staffed. And we think that for people who are working in an industry where so many of us are progressing through our careers outside of an institutional framework, that those one-on-one mentorship relationships are really crucial.
Right, exactly. And in your work, these self-selecting clients, would you say that there are certain things that you particularly help them with in navigating through this field and with their identity?
I think sometimes it's as simple as just encouraging them to be as open as they're comfortable being about who they are. That might mean, I have a gay client who's a single dad, and him getting to share photos of his kids and talk about his life. I think that that's been really affirming for him, not to feel like he has to leave that part of his life really separate. It can also be the bigger things. One of my clients is the bisexual mezzo Jamie Barton. And in 2019, she headlined Last Night of the Proms in the UK, which is like a literal flag waving event at Royal Albert Hall. There's thousands and thousands of people, and it's televised to tens of millions of people around the world. It's just this really big moment in classical music every year. And usually the people who are headlining come out and they represent where they're from. I think, an opera singer from Peru a few years ago came out in like an Incan warrior costume, for example. And Jamie came out in a gown that was designed with the colors of the bisexual flag. And when it came time to raise her flag and wave it, she raised the pride flag. And it was a really incredible moment, not just for the symbolism, but also because there was I was in the hall and there was this surge of just guttural support and joy and enthusiasm from the audience, which was unexpected to me and really powerful. And then we got deluged on the street afterwards. People were just so excited. And for months, her inbox was flooded with messages from people around the world who just said they felt for the first time that they were welcomed and truly saw themselves at the proms. That was just a really impactful moment. It was totally her idea, but the proms went along with it, which is no small thing. This fairly staid institution got behind this fairly dramatic statement of who she is and what she values.
I think we're coming to this I'm trying to see, connect some threads, and we're seeing, if there is someone at the helm, like Jamie was saying earlier, being out, being proud, being themselves, people will flock to that. People gravitate towards that, and that inspires them to live their most authentic selves. And it really takes being that type of, being that one person that will do that for others, and being that person in those spaces where they might not necessarily be as bright. So going back to what the Spectrum Ensemble does, you commission, perform works by LGBTQIA plus composers, and it's a lot of what you do, but you also connect it to the community in where you fundraise and where you put your money towards. And I really feel you doing a lot within the community of music and the LGBTQ spectrum, and merging them together in this big, really fantastic way. And I'd love you to just both kind of talk about talk about what you do a little bit more.
Yeah, so in terms of helping more of the community, we were really lucky with the first concert we threw. It was like we commissioned 4 new pieces. We wanted to find a nonprofit we were going to donate to. We wanted it to be local. We found this lovely organization called the Coalition for Aging LGBTQ, and their idea is promoting what happens to queer people when they get older. They don't have kids. Who's going to take care of them? Where can they go? Someone has Alzheimer's now. Usually that's the kid's job to take over that. Well, do they have a nephew or a niece that's going to do it? So it's a lot of going into nursing homes now to make sure they're LGBTQ friendly. They just found out that the Resource Center downtown is going to make like one of the very first LGBTQ nursing homes type of vibe. So we found them, and through just the energy, meeting with them coming to the first concert, I joined the board there. And so now a lot of what I do is, we do, is giving to the community in the DFW and online through, with percussion and doing clinics and stuff like that. And the newest thing we're working on now is we're about to do a concert at the end of every month for, it's just through the coalition because people over 55 can't really leave the house because they are very at risk. So we're trying to create opportunities for the queer elderly community to do something. So at the end of every month, me and Stephen are going to host a concert series, and we've invited literally, if you're queer and you play music, you can be part of this concert. There is some options of getting paid depending on how much time you are part of, but like if you play ukulele, you want to sing a little song, I'm sure they'd love to hear it. It's just a way to get anyone involved, especially during this pandemic, in making music and then entertaining people who can't leave their houses. So that's one way that we really give back to the community through working with them. Stephen, can you tell them a little bit about like PASIC and the interactions we've had with our performances?
Yeah. So we perform, PASIC is the Percussive Art Society International Convention, which happens usually every year. This past year was online. But so basically, I guess the year before this past year now, in 2019, we went to PASIC and we performed, we commissioned a piece for that from a trans composer. And it was great. We were basically there and we were like, as gay as possible while we were there. It's like, it's a convention filled with like white guys in button up shirts, like, being really professional. So, so we had a lot of people, coming up to us at that convention telling us like how much what we're doing means to them. And something that sort of stuff is like really gives us a lot of energy to keep going with what we're doing. We're thinking about next year, or I guess later this year in the fall at PASIC, if it happens in person, we're gonna potentially have like a LGBTQ like meetup type thing at the convention. So just like creating a space just for them.
One platform I think we've provided, which was really cool, we learned at our first concert, is we've never asked the composers to write us queer music. We've never said like, we want it to feel gay, be gay, people need to know it's gay. Never said that. We literally just provided them a list of instruments we owned and said, whatever you feel. And almost everyone who has written for us is expressing their identity in some form or another. One person, it was literally their coming out piece. We didn't know they were out. Oopsie. We asked them to write us a piece. They said yes, and that was their coming out piece. There was another person who wrote about like voices talking over each other within the queer community, kind of like Joey was saying earlier, how like we have problems within our own community with not being heard. So there's very cool themes being created with the platform we're providing, which is very exciting to see, because queer music doesn't like it's not categorized yet, queer music. Like there is no what is it called when you type it in? The resource thing.
Database.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, database.
There's no database for queer composers, queer performers, and that's pretty wild when there are databases that exist of different things that are right along those lines.
One last thing we've been thinking about that we want to do hopefully this year is like start an online community just for, you know, queer people, and, you know, maybe also another side offshoot of that for, you know, queer people of color. You know, we're constantly like reaching out to people through social media, like, hey, who wants to be involved with this project? Or like, who are the composers out there? Like, why are we not all connected with each other? It would be so valuable to have that community aspect, where people are open to, you know, expressing themselves and connecting.
That's all like completely amazing. I really admire what you're all doing.
Can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry,
Please.
I just wanted to give a tiny shout out. I should have mentioned. So with Turn the Spotlight, our fellows develop a big project over the course of their fellowship. And Aidan Feldkamp, who's the Director of Emerging Composers and Diversity at American Composers Orchestra, is one of our fellows this year. And Aidan is developing an anthology of music for trans voices, which is going to be published by New Music Shelf, which is so cool. And I can't wait to check it out.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So I wanted to take the conversation in a slightly different direction and start sort of talking about allyship, which I think is, you know, a bit of a buzzword these days, but perhaps for good reason, and just sort of get your perspectives about what that word means and what it means to be a good ally. So I wanted to start by throwing that to Tona.
Okay. Actually, I appreciate you having that question because it's one that I find most people don't really understand what being an ally is. And specifically in our community, in the African American, you know, minority community, there's this thought that you can still discriminate against me, but you're my ally if I give you an opportunity. So, you know, and that's very prevalent amongst Black organizations. You know, you as long as you're over here, you know, you might be here, but you got to be over here. And it's a huge problem. So being an ally is someone who really listens. They don't overtalk. You're listening to see what you can do to be a part of the change that you want to see or that people are telling you needs to happen. And it has to start from there, a mutual respect. That's the first off. One of the things you learn in activism, you know, that I think that we need to do better at. And I feel that these orchestras and so many of these places that claim that they, you know, support even just Black Lives Matter. Well, as the someone had mentioned earlier about being in Baltimore, I did have the experience of moving to Baltimore for a little bit. And one of the things I used to go off about on their forums and walls with the Baltimore Symphony is that if this is supposedly the chocolate city, why is there only like 2 or 3 Black people in this orchestra? I used to say the same thing when I would, even though I was hired to come and do certain things, I would go to the conductor. I would say these things on their walls, on online, and say, and I'm not a symphony musician, you know, but I would hear the frustration. If you have Peabody right there, and you've trained all these wonderful musicians of color, but then they can't even get into your orchestra. You know, so what we need are allies who are willing to look at these different situations, who are going to listen and then make sure that they put people of color in positions of power to make things happen. We need people who understand that diversity isn't just a thing or just some little coin of a word, but it is essential. And in everything that I do, I even try to make sure that I work so hard with my company, Aida Studios, with my students to enforce that diversity in every way. You know, So being an ally is someone who is going to listen, someone who is going to try to help to make the change that needs to happen, but they're also going to sit back. Because you have, like I said, you have so many people who claim they're allies and they're still sitting from a position of power, and they're not listening to that. That is part of the change that we need. Okay. We need you to sit back and not try to tell us what's the problem. We're telling you what the problem is. So you have to listen to that. And even I will say there was a lady, and I talk about her often. She knows who I'm talking about, but she went to go do an audition. And once the conductor found out that she had won over 160 violins, once he found out that she was a woman of color, there's one more preliminary where you meet the conductor. And after she met the conductor, all of a sudden, she was not hired. Do you see what I'm saying? So, but had we had the right allies in place, somebody would have spoke up. Someone would have even made this a legal issue and said, you know what? We're going to put the resources together to pay your legal fees to fight this. But the system has it to where there's one more step. What is that extra step? What do you need another step for if behind the screen I beat 160, 120, 52, whoever it was? I won the audition. So why did I not get the position? Do you see what I'm saying? And this happens all the time. And thankfully, I was raised up around these musicians who are now, they're all over the world. Everyone's performing, doing their own thing, and they're still made careers for themselves, but we would have been a lot further along with true allies.
That's incredibly helpful. Thank you. Joey, can I pass it to you for that question?
Yeah. Firstly, everything said about Baltimore Symphony is absolutely true. Studying at Peabody and us having about zero relationship with them. I know at NEC, someone please correct me if I'm wrong, Boston Symphony, you get like free tickets. I'm pretty sure at Baltimore Symphony, that was a cool $25 a night. So did not go see them. But I personally think the word ally is fake. I don't believe in it. I think it is like Nirvana, something white people are going to try to shoot for the rest of their life. But if you give someone the title of ally, they feel like they've made it. They've ascended and they stop working. You can't get comfortable because no change has really happened yet. And through my life experiences, honestly, going to Peabody, being from Houston, before I went to Peabody, I studied at a school, Stephen F. Austin State University. And what that showed me is that the only people that got Black people is Black people. Because like I said earlier, in the community, it's a separate community. I feel like there's the Black, Latinx, trans people and queer people. And then there's like just the Black, queer, trans people, because what you were saying earlier about raising money for legal fees, the community should be doing that, but we can't rely on everyone in the community. Now, I will say another way to look at allyship is being a part of the community, building, I don't like the word network, but just building your systems between people. If I guess back in the day, a little bit before I was born, if you're short on rent, you're going to throw a rent party, like get lit. And also, you got rent. So it just things like that. But no, I think allyship is bullshit, in all honesty. And I think you just need to do it because the work needs to be done. And if it isn't done, then just don't lie about it. And this is something I like to say on these things. It's just, okay. So if you have two white people and you have a Trump supporter and you have a white liberal, I would rather be sitting next to the Trump supporter than the white liberal, because I know he hates me, and everything I stand for. This person, if the police comes, going to freeze up and I'm going to die. I'm going to die regardless, but at least he stood his ground. At least I knew I was going to die the whole time. I didn't get like stabbed in the back or anything, and I feel like so much in the music world and conservatory world, there's more progressive people than otherwise. But overall, it's not as much as it could be. But just like during the pandemic, and a lot of us have been away from our community. I had to go home to Houston. I love my family, y'all, but that was like horrific. I watched Legendary because I like that show, but I cried because I was like, I haven't seen the girls and the gays in 3 months. And just like having these like online kikis with my girls and playing Among Us and just getting to be our Black queer selves, it has just been absolutely life-changing through this pandemic. But yeah, at the end of the day, I don't think true allyship exists because I don't believe in allies. What I will say, white people do need to step to the side and give more Black people, Latinx people, and non-Black POC room in these organizations. Because something George Lewis told me in 2018 is that we have to get in and be the mole. You have to get in, get the bag, and then get everybody else the bag. Be the Robin Hood, and that to me is how change is going to happen, because I don't trust that any white person is actually going to make change for us. I do believe that Black people, Latinx people, we're going to be the ones that make the change, and Indigenous people, it just, we need the space to be great to help everyone get great. I'm not gonna say his name because he's embarrassed, but one of my friends won an orchestra fellowship, and we were talking about it the other day, and I was like, when you won this, we all won this. Like a win for one really is a win for all, for the Black people, Black queer people, because you were getting in and you're representing all of us, and we don't want you to feel any pressure because we also got you if something happens, and that is my idea of community. We are constantly uplifting each other. We are constantly giving each other space. We are constantly giving support and the kicking. We are being the parents that most of us did not have. We all got to be the aunties and uncles out here, So while I don't believe in allyship, I do very much believe in community, and that is what is going to help most of us keep our heads up.
Wow, thank you for that. That's really powerful. You're right. I mean, it's so easy for somebody to say that they got you, but then not actually step up to the plate when an opportunity presents itself to actually prove that they do got you, right? And I think that sort of leads us into the next question. It's sort of similar, but regardless of race, and I'll start with Stephen on this one, what can non-queer spectrum individuals who really do want to be there for people and be a part of the change, what can non-queer spectrum individuals and organizations do, not just to be there, but to ensure that they really are promoting, diversity, equity, inclusion, all these things that are so important within their work?
Yeah. So there's so much to say about this. And also, like, Joey, you were like 1000% spot on. Like, allyship has been appropriated by whiteness at this point. We need at this point, I really liked what I heard from Indigenous Action Media. They have this article, we need accomplices, not allies, right? Too often I've seen people, they'll put their black square after George Floyd on their Instagram profile, and then that's all you hear from them for the rest of the year, right? People need to take those moments of, this viral, everyone is all of a sudden interested in George Floyd or whatever, the Capitol riots that just happened, like, now it's in our heads again. We need to, allies need to take that moment and like recommit themselves to being accomplices and to like doing the work and to learning about these things. To answer more of this question, I think there's a lot of things that allies can do. Like I was saying earlier, in like organizations, there's a lot of structural things, but that's really like specific to different organizations. And, there's a lot of blind spots. So it's good to like bring someone in to help you specifically with your situation. But in general, what I really would like to hear more conversation about is changing the culture, or changing the cultures in our organizations and the way that we interact with people, and especially the way that I see people who call themselves allies interacting or not interacting, not holding their peers accountable, right? So we hear so much about workplace culture in terms of, Silicon Valley or something making things more productive, essentially. But I think there could be a lot more about changing the culture in a way that promotes anti-racism in our environment, that promotes, queer liberation and all of this. like Janaya Khan says, you know, we need to make fascism unfashionable. Well, we also need to make it fashionable to be doing the work, right? Yeah, so I guess my biggest thing is accountability. Like, so many of these issues that we face we would gain so much more momentum so much quicker if people held each other accountable more. And I'm not talking about like canceling people or anything. I'm talking about, like, you know, we've all been in that situation where you're in an orchestra or something and some straight white man makes a super misogynistic joke or something. And instead of calling them out, everyone just, you know, sort of chuckles awkwardly and doesn't say anything, you know? I feel like we need to be pushing our culture towards a place where it's like a good thing to just say, you know, you don't have to make it a whole argument, but just say, that's not cool. That's not acceptable in this environment, and then move on. You know, I feel like so many people think that doing the work is like arguing with a Trump supporter on Facebook or something, when it's really doing this uncomfortable thing of speaking to your peers and holding them accountable to do better when you notice these things. Like, yeah, I mean, like, and it's really hard, you know, like just this past week, I called out this straight white man on Facebook for saying something really misogynist. And like, even then, and I'm like practicing this, like my hands were shaking when I was doing it. Like, it's human nature, I think, to not want to rock the boat, right? Like humans are a social species. Like, evolutionarily, we've survived because of that. So it's like built into us to, like, you know, not call people out. But I would love to see more people, like, you know, just holding, especially privileged people, holding other privileged people accountable. You know, I think that's what's going to give us the momentum to really actually change things. Yeah.
In terms of holding people accountable, I think there's still organizations that me and Steven have talked about within the music community have not outright said Black Lives Matter. And that's one thing that's very confusing to me, why it's so hard to say that. Like, because I don't want to get into politics. Human lives aren't politics. Like, it's, you just have to say it. And that's where we can start with accountability. I'm not trying to cancel any of these companies in the music world, but if you can't say that, what is your organization about? Look at your board members. Are they all white? Oh, maybe you should change that. You know what I mean? Just using the awareness, like open your awareness, because a lot of people, it's all out of their awareness, these issues. So they think that they don't have to do anything about it, but like, you need to open your eyes and see it through someone else's eyes so you can hold things like this accountable.
But also with that, they don't say it because they don't care. That's the thing at the end of the day. I would rather them not say it than say it and be performative. At least you know. But the thing is, I personally, Jamie, like, we do need to fight to be in these spaces, because what is it, Tonya? I'm so sorry if I said that wrong.
Tona
Said earlier, it's, oh wow, I just completely blank. I'm gonna come back to it if it comes back. But basically, we have to make our own spaces. You know, oh, I remember. If you want to be a classical musician or you want to be an opera singer, you absolutely deserve to do that. You absolutely deserve to win a job and have a peaceful time there. At the same time, it's not a but at the same time, we need to make our own. You know, we need to, yes, keep them accountable, but also let's not spend all of our energy trying to change people who don't want to change. So it just, our time is the richest thing we can offer, you know, because Jeff Bezos is going to actually take all the money in the world. So at this point, we need to realize that our energy is $127 billion, or however much that makes. So we need to come together in that way. And what can we do to make as a collective to where we create our own space that these issues just aren't there? There will still be issues, but we can keep each other accountable because we know how to. You know, there's a lot of orchestras out there that are not with the shits. There's a lot of these competitions that are not with the shits. So we do need to fight. We always need to fight and keep them accountable, but also it's time to shift a little bit and create our own spaces that last longer, that have a strong foundation, that have a truly diverse board. And instead of using the word diverse, a board that represents reality. What does the word world actually look like? And just to jump back a little bit to a question you asked about before, like the artists who are doing things like that, I feel like we throw a lot of shit to pop artists and everything. But I don't know if you listen to Jasmine Sullivan's new album that came out, Tales, amazing. It's Tales of and for the first time in R&B, there was a queer Black woman on there talking about her story of like how she cheated on her girlfriend or fiance and how that ended. I have never heard a queer story in R&B or hip hop before on the mainstream, but also Rihanna's fashion show. All the girls were there. We were there, and no one is talking about it because we just keep looking within our community instead of expanding ourselves. And a lot of us say that we're decolonizing things, but we're not, because we keep things in classical music, which was curated for white people by white people. But out here, there's so many Black art forms that are doing the work that just isn't taught in conservatory. So a lot of us don't pay attention to it. But yes, so that's what I would say. We need to look also to outside of music, look to pop artists, look into spoken word, look into Black performance artists, Black curators, Indigenous as well to all of that, Latinx to it as well. And we need to just stop having such a tunnel vision of what we can do to make change and how to keep people accountable.
Can I say one thing? As this pertains to, this question pertaining to classical musicians, we're going to go also back to what we were talking about before, just gently about the problem of building within our own community because of the discrimination that we have within our own community against queer people, you know what I'm saying, in general. So one of the first things that I will share from my own personal experience is that when you perform with many of the greatest musicians in the world, right, those people know who you are. And without mentioning names and organizations, but just think about it. For those who didn't know that I perform for presidents and that I do the type of work that I do, think of all of the organizations that you all love and care about that have never hired me. Think of the people that knew me since I was 15, came to see me perform for Isaac Stern, came to see me do all these different things, and supported me, gave me free lessons, did all this type of thing. But how many of them hire us? So one of the biggest things that I would say, if you're supposedly an ally or if you want to see change and all that, first of all, we got to get over our own stuff. We need to pick up some books, read. We need to listen. And then what we have to do is process some of those things that you do in counseling and you learn, and for those who do advocacy and all that stuff. But what you have to do is then say, look, here's a problem. Here's a system that does not hire this individual, right? Let me hire this person. I had a gentleman contact me. We went to school together, and the school used to put us against he was like my arch nemesis. And we would go into the competition room, and then he would go all the way on one side. He's a good friend of mine. And we would go on the other side. He's a white man. And he's made great success at the Grand Opry and other type of things. And he's now learning about racism and all these things. And he has the skills and all this carrying on. So the first thing I said to him when he came to me and said, oh, you did your Carnegie Hall debut and you've done all these different things. And so I said, well, the only thing you need to do is when there's an opportunity, share that opportunity with someone like myself or myself. That's all you have to do. You don't have to sit there and move the world. You don't have to bring the moon down to the earth. Something just that simple is hire queer people. Hire queer people of color. Make that part of your doctrine in life. You know that whoever is seen as less than or doesn't have the same privileges as yourself needs help. Period. Now, it was so interesting because I said it to him in just a very flippant, cool way. And he's just like, that's all you have to do. We're not asking you to, we're not asking for a handout, because if you put me on the stage, I'm gonna play that whatever it is that you give me just as well as anyone else. But we need you. We need people like you to hire us, put us in positions in leadership positions. And if we're gonna build on our own, which is what I've done with my own ensemble, which is why I hire so many Black, trans, anybody who's different musicians, why I teach so many type of students or whatever, no matter what their socioeconomic is, that is part of the change. So you need to hire us. You need to put us in leadership positions. And as everyone else said, we need to be able to hold everyone accountable. But number one thing, if you claim that you're an ally to everybody, specifically people of color, and especially to queer people, then you can't tell me you're my ally or even my friend when you never hire me. I'm sorry. You can't tell me that your organization is diverse and that you believe in all this stuff when you don't, when I can't see it in the organization. That's it.
Going back to an earlier quote, yeah, we want accomplices, not allies. I absolutely love that, and I'll have to check out that conversation. So with everything that's been said, ideally for you, if we were cultivating our dream world, what would this field of classical music and the music world at large look like? Should some of the things you've been talking about be implemented, and what would that look like? I mean, for me, for one, these conversations would never have to happen. It would come to a day where everybody's just going and letting people be themselves. But for each one of you, I'd love you to give a quick little, what you would really like to see as, saying, all right, we are actually making some real progress in the field. What would that look like to you? And I'd love to begin with Jaime.
Very loaded question. I think just like piggybacking off what you said, at its core, I don't want to look around and be surprised that there's another gay person in the room. I just want it to be normal, that it's like a mix of everyone everywhere you go, because spaces are created where everyone feels that they can just be themselves.
Stephen.
Yeah, I think we need to understand that, like, we will never, at least in our lifetimes, probably reach a place where we don't have to think about this, right? The fact that people aren't thinking about it, especially people with different forms of privilege, whatever your identity is, the fact that people aren't thinking about it is why we're here in the first place, having to have this conversation, right? So for me, like, an ideal point that I want to aim towards is where people recognize that there is no finished point. We're going to have to be thinking about this for the rest of our lives, right? Like, I want everyone to, and even if there is, no racism somehow magically 40 years from now, and no, anti-gay discrimination, there's going to be some other group of people who are being discriminated against, who their voices are being suppressed, right? So I feel like we need to, as people, we need to move towards a place where we're constantly, analyzing who we are and what voices are not being included in we, what voices are being lost, and then doing the work to make that right.
Exactly. Beth.
I think classical music performances and organizations should reflect the communities they're in. That's the most basic thing, I think. I think that there are some ways in which we as individuals can make that happen. One of the main ways is entering into mentorship relationships, taking those lunch asks when you get them, use your own network to make introductions. Basically, you, by sheer virtue of being who you are, have expertise and lived experience that others don't have, and you can find ways to leverage that to elevate others. I always think about it as, when I get in rooms where decisions are being made, I do what I can to hold the door open and turn around and help those who are coming up behind me to get in that room too.
Joey.
Yeah, I think when people can show up and be themselves, we have made progress. But for me, the important thing is intersectionality, because until Black trans women are free, we will never be free. And it's really important. It's not for me just showing up and seeing other gay people. It's showing up and truly being able to kiki, showing up and seeing my girls, you know, because like I said earlier, I really live in the contemporary world at this point, and it is very Caucasian. And it's also pretty gay, but it's also very gay and white. So that is a problem. And the Black people that are there, it is why the AACM exists, you know? It is why a lot of us kind of go and do our own solo projects, because even in a community that's so small, and have to learn microtones. I don't understand how you can take the time to learn microtones and still hate other people, because it's so hard. But we need more representation. We need to keep intersectionality at the root of this work, because without it, you're still just gonna have a room full of gay people, but it's gonna be a room of white gay people. So we need to make sure that is what we're doing. So, I mean, just organizations don't have to exist. Once we have equality, would Sphinx exist? Would it need to exist anymore if there is no more racial discrimination in music? But yeah, I think we need to start looking not just at music, but look at fashion, look at dance, visual art, because once we tackle this one thing, there's still going to exist another, but we can all tackle this together. So yes, when we can show up and everyone feels like they can be their true authentic self, that is when we will make it. And that does not mean white people showing up and make it to be racist, because that might be their true authentic self. But just getting to truly be the person you want to be after struggling so long to find yourself and to love yourself.
I think that's a very beautiful way of putting it. I totally agree. Tona.
Okay, I promise to try to keep this brief. So here's one thing I will say, because there's so many young people here. Not only will you be successful, but what you have to understand with the system is that a lot of this comes down to funding on a corporate level. Okay, so one of the biggest changes that needs to happen, which we may see even in our lifetime, is that for the first time you may be able to actually get funding to put on your own things. So what has been a stumbling block for me has been that I've always had to pay for everything myself. Okay. And raise money, you know, community monies, and do all this type of stuff. So what I would like to see, not only that we're holding them accountable and all these wonderful things, that they are hiring us, and that they're putting us in these leadership positions. But what I want to see in this new, more diverse, amazing world that's just like what we see every day outside and all that, is I want to see funding come to our projects. And if you're gonna say that you're a corporation that believes in this type of stuff, when I put on my Carnegie Hall debut, there was no funding, and one of the reasons why was because it was not as diverse in the other way. For the programming, I also want to see more African American composers, art songs, charity, all the above on a global level in programming, because we already know from research that there's only like 0.1 something 10% or something globally of our music being shared as far as classical music. So just like a lot of people here, of course, I do a little bit of everything, but as far as classical music is concerned, you shouldn't go, and if you're going to keep doing Les Nozze di Figaro over and over and over, but you're not seeing any like Tremonisha or anything like that, that needs to change. If we were in this hypothetical world where everything was equal, especially for us as classical musicians, because that's part of the things that's keeping us from always having a gig. If Othello is not done, then they're not going to put someone who looks darker as the lead tenor. Do you see what I'm saying? So you have to also have, we have to force, which is what we always have to do. You're going to have to force these organizations to incorporate a higher percentage of our music into their programming for the entire year. That's something that I would love to see. And I will say that's starting to change a lot. Here in DC, we have the Kennedy Center, and their board is so amazing. You got rappers on there, you got some everything, and they give so many free performances every night. There's a free performance. All of this is because of the change that we want to see, and we're fighting for and saying, as Clifton said, or Joey, whichever way you want me to call it, what Joey said, you know, these orchestras need to be held accountable, and we're gonna have to, but we have to get the money, y'all. You know, I know some of y'all young and everything. It comes down to the coin, period, point blank. If I can't put on this event and pay you and you and you and you and you when I don't have the money, and they know that. So we need to hold them accountable. We need to, all the things that people are saying, but we need to get our own monies together, and we need to get them to give us money for our projects, and to stop making excuses as to why they can't fund our projects.
Can I piggyback off of that really quick? So I'm work a little bit with this group, New Music Equity Action, and I think there's several other groups that are doing similar work. Specifically, what we're doing is anti-racist stuff in new music. But they are putting out some resources that specifically are to help, like, especially white-run, you know, funding organizations, and at all levels. So, you know, the funders, the ensembles, and individual musicians, like resources that, you know, especially white people or whatever form of privilege you have, resources for you to do these things equitably, right? So if, you know, it is all about the money, right? So, you know, but I feel like so often we talk about these things, but then, you know, white people are like, well, what do we even do? We have no idea what to do. Well, there are groups out there that you can find that are putting out resources that give you specific things that will make your processes more equitable. So hopefully that's helpful.
As we said earlier, you know, the work can't stop, and it's always asking, you know, who's included in that we when we're talking about we, and always trying to find what that is, if it's actually going to be really inclusive, and there's always going to be a community that's potentially marginalized. I want to thank everybody for their time. This was such an inspiring conversation to me. I feel a bit, I mean, you got a lot of the words off of my chest, it's the best way I can put it. So I want to thank you all so much for your time and for your wisdom, for really getting down to the nitty gritty of why this talk is important, and what can be done, what's working, what's not working, in such a candid way. I really thank you all for your voice in this. Thank you so much for tuning in to this portion of our 3-part discussion series, where today we discussed the LGBTQIA+ experience within the music field. Again, thank you to our panelists for taking the time to share their wisdom and experiences on this subject. I hope you learned something new. Until next time.